Greetings and welcome to our daily walk through the scripture for August the 4th. Your readings today find you in Ezra chapters 1 and 2, 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 18 through 34, and 1 Corinthians 2 1 through 5, and Psalm 27 verses 7 through 14. Now here we are yet again starting a new book of the Bible, this case the book of Ezra. Now Ezra is a historical book and it takes place during the exile. So remember, when we finished the Chronicles, Judah and Israel had now been exiled, and they had been taken captive and taken to wherever they were taken. Well, in the case of Ezra, things have centered around, they had been centered around Babylon, okay? And we'll hear more about Babylon when we get into some of the books of the prophets, like Daniel especially. But in this case, the Babylonian Empire had just been defeated by the Media-Persia Empire, okay? I know, there's a lot of empires. You had the Assyrian Empire that first took care of Judah and Israel, okay? And then they moved over to the Babylonian Empire, and they held on for a while, and you're going to, again, see them a lot in Daniel. Then you've got the Media-Persian Empire, okay? And now Cyrus is the king. Now, there's a few things to keep in mind when we're reading about the book of Ezra. First of all, what is the book about? Well, it is about rebuilding. Right around 538 BC, years before Christ, we have a return of people from Babylon to Jerusalem. And they start doing things, and they start rebuilding things. However, things don't always go really great. They receive a lot of opposition. They receive a lot of difficulty. And so then Ezra comes into the picture. Now, this doesn't happen immediately. As a matter of fact, this actually happens like 100 years later, okay? There's a long time before Ezra comes. During that return, about 80 years, during that time, there's a lot of opposition happening. Now, the thing about Ezra to remember is that Ezra is not written chronologically, meaning that in the first few chapters of Ezra, he kind of gives a 50,000-foot view, a kind of a history of what's going on. And he talks about various kings. He talks about Cyrus. He talks about Darius. He talks about Xerxes, Artaxerxes, okay? But then he jumps back and he starts talking about Darius again. And then he skips and he starts talking about Artaxerxes again. So what we're talking about here is really quite a large span of time that's happening, at least before Ezra arrives. Now, when Ezra shows up, we're talking about only 1 year. Ezra's book really happens in the span of 1 year when he arrives. And he wanted to really show how God put his hand into the rebuilding of the city, and in particular, the rebuilding of the temple. And so as we read through Ezra, the first few chapters, we're going to kind of get the overview. And then starting right around chapter 6, we're going to start to see some of the detail work of Ezra coming back, and then how they did some cleaning up of some things, how they worked on the temple, and also how they kind of cleaned things up in terms of the people of Israel had gone astray. Because remember, whenever exiles happen, the policy of the Assyrian Empire was to bring people in from outside and intermarry and intermingle. And this is how we end up with Samaria and the Samaritan woman and all those things during the time of Jesus. This is that intermingling. Ezra is trying to get back to the law. He's trying to get people to follow the law. And so we're going to see some things in Ezra that are going to come across as a little harsh, as a little strong, especially to our eyes today. We have to remember that this was what was happening, and the book is not saying whether this is right or wrong, though for the record the book says it's right because they're following God's law. We have to remember a much more different time. This is happening 2,500 years ago. A lot of things have happened since then. So we just need to be aware of that. But ultimately, Ezra is going to come away victorious. Now, one other thing that we need to note is that following this book, the book of Ezra, is going to get the book of Nehemiah. Now, I'm going to give a broader introduction to the book of Nehemiah when it's time. But in the meantime, we need to be aware that Ezra and Nehemiah are contemporaries. These guys are actually going to be appearing. As a matter of fact, Ezra specifically appears into the letter of Nehemiah. So we need to be aware that this is happening at the same time. When we read about the rebuilding of the temple, and then we read about Nehemiah working on the wall of Jerusalem and stuff, these are intermingled and these happen roughly about the same time. Okay, so there's kind of our story of Ezra, or at least our introduction of Ezra. We will pick back up with scripture readings tomorrow. In the meantime, have a blessed day.